The sun beat down on the quiet southern town, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement of Jim's Gas and Auto, the kind of place that hadn't changed much in the last 40 years. The scent of gasoline and hot asphalt filled the air as Earl E.J. Jackson, a 62-year-old retired Army Ranger, pulled into the lot. He stepped out of his old pickup truck, his boots hitting the ground with a quiet thud. He had just stopped in for gas and maybe a cold soda, a simple errand. But trouble had a way of finding men like him. Across the lot, by the entrance of the gas station, a commotion was unfolding. E.J. paused, watching as a young police officer, Deputy Travis Reed, leaned over the counter, his voice sharp, barking orders at Mr. Carter, the elderly black man who owned the station. Carter, in his late 70s, stood behind the register, his face lined with years of hard work and patience. But right now, that patience was wearing thin. Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel, as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you. Now, back to the story. I've told you 100 times, son, Carter said, his voice calm but firm. My business has been up to code since before you were born. You don't have to come in here harassing me every damn week. Reed scoffed. Yeah, maybe I just don't like the way you're running things. EJ felt his hands clench into fists. He had seen this before, a young, power-hungry cop throwing his weight around, picking the weakest person in the room to prove something. But Mr. Carter wasn't weak, and neither was EJ. The tension thickened, the gas station silent now, the few customers frozen, unsure whether to intervene. Then, Reed reached across the counter, knocking over a cup of pens and Carter's reading glasses. Clean this place up, old man, Reed sneered. Or maybe next time, I come back with a health inspector. Carter straightened, his face a mask of quiet rage. That's when EJ stepped forward. You might want to pick that up, EJ said, his voice steady, calm but lethal. Reed turned, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? EJ didn't repeat himself. Didn't need to. He just held Reed's gaze, unflinching. The entire gas station was watching now. Reed straightened, puffing out his chest. Who the hell are you? EJ stepped closer. The man telling you to show some damn respect. For a second, just a flicker of a moment, there was hesitation in Reed's eyes, like he could feel the weight of EJ's presence, the difference between an actual warrior and a boy playing soldier. But pride is a dangerous thing. Reed scoffed, rolling his shoulders. This ain't got nothing to do with you, old man. Best get back in your truck before I find a reason to ticket you too. EJ tilted his head slightly. You got a real bad habit of talking to elders like they owe you something, he said. Maybe someone never taught you manners? Reed bristled, his hand twitching toward his belt. You want to get arrested today? Reed challenged, stepping in closer, trying to intimidate. EJ didn't move, didn't blink. Instead, he let the silence stretch, let Reed feel just how much danger he had just walked into. And then, Reed made the worst mistake of his life. He shoved EJ. It wasn't a hard shove, more symbolic than anything, a little push to let him know who was in charge. But EJ was a war veteran, a man who had faced down death more times than he could count. And being shoved by a rookie cop, it barely registered. EJ took half a step back, rolling his shoulders, exhaling slowly through his nose. The gas station was dead silent. The customers stared. Mr. Carter looked ready to explode. And Reed, for the first time, Reed looked nervous. EJ adjusted his jacket. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, son, he said, his voice low. Reed swallowed. What? EJ smiled. Hope you like your job, because you ain't gonna have it much longer. And with that, EJ turned, walking out of the gas station, his heartbeat steady, his mind already working. Because he wasn't done. Not by a long shot. EJ Jackson didn't waste time. He had lived long enough to know when a fight was worth picking, and this was worth it. By the time he got home, the sun had started its slow descent beyond the trees, but EJ wasn't in the mood for rest. He moved with quiet purpose, walking straight to his old wooden desk, flipping open his laptop. His hands, calloused from years of service, moved over the keyboard with precision. He started with a simple email, one to a man he knew well, Sheriff Wallace Kincaid. They had known each other since high school, though their paths had taken very different turns. Wallace had stayed in town, climbed the ranks, and eventually took over the sheriff's department. He wasn't corrupt, but he was comfortable. Too comfortable to shake things up, too used to letting his officers do as they pleased as long as it didn't cause waves. Well, this was going to cause a damn tsunami. The email was short, to the point. "Sheriff, I suggest you get ahead of a situation before it gets worse. One of your boys, Deputy Reed, decided to put his hands on me today at Jim's Gas and Auto. Witnesses, camera footage. You already know how bad this looks. You got 24 hours before I take this hire. Do the right thing. EJ." He sent it. Then he leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle. He already knew what would happen next. In towns like this, the system didn't change because people in power wanted it to. It changed because it was forced to. The next morning, EJ walked into Rosie's diner, his usual spot. The place was already buzzing, the morning rush in full swing. Conversations overlapped, coffee cups clinked, the smell of bacon filled the air. But the moment EJ stepped inside, the whole place went quiet. He smirked, so the town had heard. Rosie, the owner, was standing behind the counter, hands on her hips, shaking her head as he slid onto a bar stool. "Lord have mercy, EJ. What did you do?" EJ raised an eyebrow. "Me?" Rosie scoffed, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee. "Don't play innocent. Half the town's been talking about what happened at Jim's yesterday. Someone posted a video. You're the damn talk of the town." EJ took a slow sip of coffee, glancing at the TV mounted in the corner. The morning news was running, and sure enough, there it was. Local deputy under scrutiny after altercation with veteran. Underneath the headline was a still frame of Deputy Reed, mid-shove, his hand pressing against EJ's chest. The diner buzzed with whispers. EJ just took another sip of coffee, unfazed. Guess that 24-hour deadline was too generous. Rosie let out a sharp laugh. "You ain't right, old man." Before EJ could respond, the diner door swung open. Sheriff Kincaid stepped inside. The room tensed. He spotted EJ immediately, exhaled, and walked over. "Morning, Earl." EJ didn't bother looking up. "Morning, Sheriff." Kincaid hesitated before sitting down across from him. He looked like a man who'd been up all night, his uniform slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "You really had to put this all over town?" Kincaid muttered. EJ finally met his gaze. "I didn't put anything anywhere. Your deputy did." Kincaid sighed. "Damn it, EJ." EJ set his coffee down. "Let me guess. You want me to let it go? Want me to pretend it never happened?" Kincaid didn't answer. "That's what I thought." Kincaid ran a hand over his face. "You know this is a mess, right? You know how hard this is going to be for me to clean up?" EJ smirked. "Not my problem." Kincaid gritted his teeth. "Look, I'll handle Reed, I promise. Just don't take this to the state board, all right? I'll put him on suspension, maybe transfer him." "Not enough," EJ cut in. Kincaid frowned. "What?" EJ leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "He put his hands on me, in front of half the damn town. You and I both know what happens if it was the other way around. If I was the one who shoved him, I'd be in jail before the dust settled." Kincaid didn't argue, because he knew it was true. "He resigns," EJ said flatly, "effective immediately." Kincaid looked like he wanted to argue, but the weight of the situation was already pressing down on him. The town was watching, waiting to see what he would do, and he knew damn well he couldn't bury this. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I need a day to make it happen." EJ nodded. "You got 12 hours. Kincaid's jaw tightened. "You always like making my life hell?" EJ grinned. "Only when you deserve it." Kincaid stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Damn, old man." He turned and walked out. As soon as the door shut, the diner erupted into murmurs. Rosie just shook her head, pouring EJ another cup of coffee. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" EJ chuckled. "Rosie, I quit a long time ago." He lifted his cup, taking another slow sip. "But trouble keeps finding me anyway." And this time, he wasn't letting go until justice was served. The weight of the town's attention settled on Sheriff Wallace Kincaid like a noose tightening around his neck. By the time he got back to his office, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Concerned residents, local business owners, a few reporters sniffing around. The people wanted answers. More importantly, they wanted action. And the worst part? The damn video kept spreading. It wasn't just a local scandal anymore. Some bigger news outlets had picked it up, and now Kincaid was getting calls from state officials, asking why one of his deputies had just been caught assaulting a decorated war veteran in broad daylight. Kincaid knew his options were running thin. He called Deputy Reed into his office. The young officer walked in with a cocky smirk, like he was untouchable. He had the look of a man who still thought his badge was a shield, that his uniform would protect him. He was wrong. Kincaid gestured for him to sit, but Reed remained standing, arms crossed over his chest, like he had nothing to be worried about. "I assume this is about the little misunderstanding at Jim's," Reed said, his tone casual, dismissive. Kincaid stared at him. "Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you. Now, back to the story." "Misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Reed shrugged. "The old man was getting in my way. I was just doing my job." Kincaid let the silence stretch, his fury slow burning beneath the surface. "You put your hands on a veteran in front of a crowd on camera," Kincaid said. "You don't have a job anymore." Reed's smirk vanished. "Wait, what?" "You're fired, Reed," Kincaid said, flat and final. "Turn in your badge." Reed laughed, but there was a slight edge of panic beneath it. "You can't be serious. Over some old man?" Kincaid's jaw tightened. "Over Earl Jackson, and because I'm not about to let your dumbass mistakes burn this entire department to the ground." Reed shook his head, still in denial. No, this is bullshit. I've seen worse happen in this town, and nobody cared. You're really gonna throw me under the bus for him?" Kincaid's patience snapped. "For him?" Kincaid leaned forward, voice boiling with frustration. "That old man you put your hands on, he's a 2-time Silver Star recipient, 3 Purple Hearts. He trained Special Forces before you were even born, and you thought you could push him around like some nobody?" Reed swallowed hard. For the first time, real fear crept into his eyes. Kincaid continued, his voice low, sharp. "He's got more respect in this town than you ever will. And now, everyone knows what kind of man you are. So, yeah, Reed, you're done." Reed's hands clenched into fists. "So that's it? You're just gonna hang me out to dry?" Kincaid leaned back in his chair, unbothered. "No, son, you hung yourself." Reed stood there, seething, his whole world crumbling around him. "Turn in your badge," Kincaid repeated, "or I let the state come in and make sure you never work in law enforcement again." Reed had no choice. Slowly, he unclipped his badge from his chest, staring at it like he couldn't believe what was happening. Then, with a sharp, bitter movement, he slammed it onto the desk. "Fine," he spat, "but don't think for a second that this is over." Kincaid didn't flinch. "Oh, it's over," the sheriff said. "You just ain't figured it out yet." Reed stormed out of the office, his career in ashes. But outside, the real reckoning was just beginning. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time EJ arrived at Rosie's diner, the news had already reached every corner of town. "Did you hear?" Rosie grinned, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee as he sat down at the counter. "Reed's out. Kincaid fired his ass this morning." EJ nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. He had expected it, planned for it. Still, hearing it confirmed was satisfying. "Guess justice ain't as slow as I thought," he muttered. Rosie laughed. "Only when it's got you pushing it along." But EJ wasn't smiling, because he knew men like Reed, and he had a feeling that this wasn't the last he'd see of him. The air in town felt different that evening, like a storm had just passed, but the sky hadn't quite cleared. EJ Jackson sat on his porch, the rocking chair creaking under his weight as he nursed a cold beer, staring out into the thickening dusk. He should have felt satisfied. Reed was fired. The town had seen the truth, and for once justice had moved faster than usual. But something still itched at the back of his mind. Men like Reed didn't just slink away quietly, they lashed out. His instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive in war zones, told him that this wasn't over. A truck rumbled down the dirt road toward his house. Not a sheriff's car, not a neighbor, something unexpected. The headlights cut off before it even reached the driveway. EJ set his beer down. The door of the truck slammed shut, and out of the shadows stepped Deputy Travis Reed. No badge, no uniform, just a man with nothing left to lose. EJ didn't stand up. He just sat there, rocking slowly, watching as Reed walked up the path like he had something to prove. Reed stopped at the base of the porch steps, hands clenched into fists, shoulders tight with anger. "You happy now?" His voice was rough, bitter. EJ exhaled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you?" Reed let out a sharp laugh, but it wasn't amusement. It was pure frustration. "All this time, you've been playing some righteous old man, talking about respect, about doing what's right," Reed spat. "But what did you actually do? You ran to the town like a damn coward, had me fired, took everything from me." EJ leaned forward slightly. "I didn't take anything from you. You did that all by yourself." Reed's nostrils flared, his jaw clenching so tight it looked like it might snap. "I was a cop. I had a future here." "No," EJ corrected. "You had power, and you liked using it on the wrong people." Reed took a step closer, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. "You ruined my life, Jackson!" EJ finally stood up, slow and deliberate, his towering frame casting a long shadow in the dim porch light. "No, son," EJ said, his voice low, heavy with the weight of undeniable truth. "I saved you from becoming a bigger monster than you already were." For a second, just a flicker of a moment, Reed hesitated. Because deep down, he knew EJ was right. But pride is a deadly thing, and Reed wasn't ready to accept that yet. His hand twitched, like he wanted to throw a punch, like his rage needed somewhere to go. But he knew better. Knew that this wasn't a fight he could win. EJ tilted his head. "You came here to throw a punch, Travis? Go ahead. Take your shot." Reed didn't move, because this wasn't a cop standing in front of him anymore. This was a soldier, a warrior, a man who had faced things Reed couldn't even begin to understand. EJ took a slow step forward. "Or," he continued, "you can get in that truck, drive away, and figure out what kind of man you want to be, because right now, you're just a boy who let his badge do the talking. And now that it's gone, you don't even know who the hell you are." Reed's breath came hard and uneven. His fists trembled at his sides. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The truck door slammed. The engine roared to life. EJ stood on the porch, watching as the headlights flickered on, the tires kicking up dust as the truck peeled down the road, disappearing into the night. And just like that, Travis Reed was gone. EJ sat back down, grabbing his beer, letting the night settle around him. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in quiet victories, in making sure the wrong kind of men lost their power. And in the end, that was enough. For now. The end.